Jai Swaminarayan. Today we are reading Loya 17 of the Vachanamrut. This passage is titled Reverence and Condemnation. Let's dive right into it. On the night of Magh Sharvadhi Amas, Samvat 1877, or the 4th of January 1821, Sriji Maharaj was sitting on a large decorated cot in Surah Khachar Darbar in Loya. He had tied a white faito around his head and had tied a black bokani with another white faito. Did I say a black bokani? It doesn't actually specify the color. Anyway, he was also wearing a warm red dagli with a white angarku inside. He was wearing a white case as well. In addition to this, he had covered himself with a thick cotton cloth over which he had wrapped a yellow blanket. Very cozy. At that time, while Sriji Maharaj was sitting in a pleased mood, an assembly of munis as well as devotees from various places had gathered before him. Then, of his own will, Sriji Maharaj said, "See how powerful the force of God's Maya is." Maya referring to God's ability to create, manifest existence, material energy. It can cause great perversity. Someone who previously seemed very virtuous, for example, can suddenly become extremely vile. So saying, Sriji Maharaj urged the Paramhansas, "Ask questions today, so that we can talk." Thereupon, Nityanand Swami asked, "Maharaj, the very same person who was previously virtuous and who revered God later begins to condemn him. How then can a virtuous person remain virtuous and never let their understanding become impaired amidst even the most adverse places, times, actions, and company?" Sriji Maharaj answered, "If a person is indifferent to their body and has firmly realized their self to be the Atma, maintains vairagya, dispassion towards material existence, well, specifically towards the Pancha-Vishayas, Sriji Maharaj specifies, which are the experiences of the five senses, and has absolute faith in God coupled with the knowledge of His glory, then their mind will never become perverted, even amidst the most adverse circumstances imaginable. On the other hand, one who believes oneself to be the body and does not have an intense aversion for the Pancha-Vishayas would spite a sadhu, a spiritual renunciant, if they were to denounce the Vishayas, the experiences of the senses, even though the sadhu may be senior. Such a person would ultimately spite God as well. Furthermore, if someone has firm faith in God but lacks an extreme aversion towards the Vishayas and is still attracted to them, then even if a person like Muktanand Swami were to denounce those objects, they would go as far as to cut off the person's head with a sword in order to harm that person. Nityanand Swami then asked, "Someone may identify themselves with the body and may be attracted to the Pancha-Vishayas as well. Yet they seem to survive in the satsang fellowship, in the community of fellow spiritual seekers. How can this be explained?" Sriji Maharaj replied, "They survive in the satsang only as long as they are not confronted by an adverse situation. If a great sadhu or God were to denounce their egotism, cravings for taste, avarice, lust, anger, or their belief that they are the body, then they would surely develop contempt for that sadhu. Then they would certainly malign them and thus fall from satsang. For example, whoever has drunk sweetened milk that has been poisoned by the venom of a snake, even though they may be living at present, is sure to die. Within half an hour, or in the morning, or in the evening, today or tomorrow, eventually they will die. Without proper medical care, very grateful to live in the time that we do, where it's not the end of one's life in such a case. But unfortunately, especially in tribal areas like India today, where the Vachanamrut was spoken, we do find a lack of medical care still available, unfortunately. But hopefully, with more and more awareness on that subject, we can continue to provide care for these developing parts of the world. Nonetheless, in the same manner, one who identifies with their body will definitely bear contempt for the sadhu and will eventually fall from satsang, either after 1 month or after 2 months, after 1 year or after 2 years, or even after 10 years, or maybe at the time of death or even after death. They will certainly fall. In comparison, if a person does not identify with their body and believes, I am the Atma, due to which this body functions, I am characterized by eternal existence. I enlighten the indriyas and andhakaran, the senses and the inner faculties of cognition. I am not the one who becomes happy by possessing wealth, people who might be attracted to, etc., nor am I one who is saddened by not possessing them. Then such a person never bears contempt for the sadhu, no matter how strongly the sadhu denounces the Pancha-Vishayas or the belief that one is the body. Furthermore, they would never quarrel with the sadhu over insignificant issues, nor would they hold a grudge against them. Thereupon, Nityananda Swami asked again, how can one recognize someone who has an aversion for the Pancha-Vishayas, for the experiences of the 5 senses? Sriji Maharaj answered, a person with an aversion for the Pancha-Vishayas can be recognized by the following characteristics. When they receive sumptuous food, they would eat it, but they would not enjoy it as much as they would enjoy eating simple food. In fact, they would be troubled by it. Also, they would become upset wearing fine clothes. They would not enjoy them as much as they would enjoy wearing tattered coarse clothes. In fact, their mind becomes troubled by fine clothes. If they were to receive a luxurious bed, or if someone were to honor them, in fact, if they were to receive any sort of pleasant object, their mind would become troubled by it. In no way would one be pleased by it. On seeing such a person, one should realize they have an aversion for the Vishayas. Then Muktanand Swami asked another question. Maharaj, how can such an aversion for the Pancha-Vishayas be developed? Sriji Maharaj explained, the principal means for developing such an aversion for the Pancha-Vishayas is the knowledge of God's glory, and thereafter Atma-realization and Vairagya. We often speak in the Vachanamrut about knowledge of God's glory. I wonder how it translates from Gujarati or whatever term in the original context may be used. I find in English, although I imagine it's a quite literal and literally correct answer, it may not translate well, because when I personally think of glory, having brought up in an English-speaking culture, I think about someone who has come into battle and has won over the enemy, and they are glorious for this title, now being the victor. But what I assume intuitively is when we talk about God's glory, it's more of a kind of reverence for just the grandeur of divinity. I mean, how incomprehensible is it that the infinitude of that source, which all of this comes from, is expressed in a myriad of ways. I mean, even the finite physical universe is just amazing if we think about the workings of the atom all the way up to cellular life, planets, solar systems, galaxies, black holes. I mean, that's glorious, I think. That's wonderful. And having knowledge, having an experiential realization of that nature is just, how could we ever be attached to simple pleasures of the senses when there's just so much greater things to enjoy on the level of the soul, God's glory. I hope that my commentary doesn't intercede the point that Sriji Maharaj is making. Anyway, now, what is this glory of God? Well, it is the fear of God that Indra reigns. And fear also, I think, is a word that in religious contexts just means a kind of awe, in the same way that awe has become the word awful. And awful means bad. But there's awesome, something that's awesome, that's good. But they've both descended from this root awe, which means a kind of opening of an experience. So too, fear turned into fearful and fearsome, but both of those are negative. But the root by itself is more neutral. That the sun, the moon, and the flames of the fire emit light, that the earth supports one and all, and that the oceans do not exceed their boundaries, and that the herbs bear fruit in their appropriate seasons. Moreover, it is God who is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of the world, and whose powers include Kal, time, Maya, material existence, Purush, the primordial consciousness, and Akshar, the Lord of the universe. What object in the world, then, can attract someone who has understood the glory of God in this manner? Lust, anger, avarice, egotism, jealousy, cravings for taste, fine clothes, wealth, people whom they'd be attracted to. In fact, none of the Pancha-Vishayas can bind them. This is because they have assessed everything. They know God is like this, and these are the rewards of engaging in God's worship and listening to spiritual discourses. Akshar is like this, and the bliss associated with him is like this. Furthermore, the pleasures of Golok, Vaikunt, and Shvedvip are like this. The pleasures of Prakriti, Purush, nature and consciousness are like this. The pleasures of Brahmalok are like this. The pleasures of Swarg, heaven, are like this. And the happiness of a kingdom is like this. By the way, Brahmalok is the abode of Brahma, the form of God as the creator. And Golok, Vaikunt, and Shvedvip are different abodes of the ultimate supreme personality. In this manner, a person who has inferred the happiness latent within everything realizes the bliss of God to be the highest, and then attaches themselves to him. Well, of course, we use the masculine pronoun to denote God, but that's only relative to the Maya, the material existence, the Lila, the divine play, the Prakriti, the nature which is feminine. But of course, that one is from whom all genders arise. Then, is there any object in the world that can draw them away from the holy feet of God? There is none. Take, for example, a piece of iron. Once touched by a parasmani, It is transformed into gold. Thereafter, it cannot be transformed back into iron even by the Parasmani itself. Similarly, one who has realized the glory of God cannot be made to fall from the holy feet of God even by God himself. Could they then be made to fall by any other object? Of course not. In addition to realizing the glory of God, such a person also deeply realizes the glory of the sant, the saint, who worships God. They feel this sant is truly great because they are a true devotee of the manifest form of God. Uddhav, for example, was very learned, but because he had understood the glory of God, he did not become conceited due to his intelligence. On the contrary, he yearned for the dust from the feet of the gopis, the milk maidens of Vrindavan, and thus asked to be reborn as a vine. The reason for this was that he had witnessed the gopis' profound love towards God, whom even the verses of the Vedas seek. How then can a person who realizes the glory of the Sant of God harbor any conceit before the Sant? Why could they not bow down to them? In actual fact, they would behave as a servant of a servant before the Sant. Even if the Sant were to repeatedly physically mistreat them, they would tolerate it and would believe, it is my great fortune that I am bearing the contempt of such a Sant. Besides, due to my prarabdha, my destiny, I would have been forced to bear the abuses of my partner and children, my parents, and the royalty. I may even have to eat the leaves of Dodi and Motya. At least here, in the company of the Sant, I am fortunate enough to be able to observe the vow of non-taste due to my prarabdha. I may have been forced to wear tattered clothes or rags. At least here with the Sant, I am fortunate enough to have a blanket to cover myself with. Those are some extreme examples, and I totally understand if my viewers may have some caution surrounding that, as one should. It takes a lot of trust, a lot of faith to have such gratitude for even such things. Nonetheless, I wouldn't let just anyone mistreat you and have you feel like you are secondary anyway. It's important to know that a Sant has a lot of great qualifications, and though Sriji Maharaj is using some provocative terms to get the point across, it doesn't mean that you should necessarily take the abuse from anyone, even if they are apparently a spiritual being. Nonetheless, you can see why having such gratitude, even for some experiences which are painful, can help you in the process. But your judgment is, of course, always something I trust too. So please ensure an air of caution. Conversely, if a person enters an assembly of sadhus, of spiritual seekers, and is not accordingly honored by the Sant, and if they then bear an aversion towards the Sant, it implies that that person has not realized the glory of the Sant. Otherwise, they would not bear an aversion in that manner. Consider the following as an example. If the British governor of Mumbai, I believe this was written at the time of imperialist reign over India, were seated in an assembly, and if that time a poor person were to enter that assembly but was not given a seat or welcomed in any way, would the poor person become angry with the governor? Would they feel like swearing at the governor? Not at all. Why? Because the poor person has realized the eminence of the British official. That is, He is the ruler of the land, and I am a mere pauper. Hence, they do not become upset. Still, I certainly wouldn't blame someone for becoming upset, because the British imperialization of India was a very great tragedy on many fronts. And I love how people did express themselves in many different ways in order to reclaim their native land. But great souls, Mahatmas like Gandhi, they were able to strive for a kind of peaceful rebellion that uptook the vow of ahimsa, non-violence, and that's a very beautiful point too. Hence, they do not become upset. In the same manner, then, if a person has realized the glory of the Sant, then regardless of how much the Sant scorns them, they would never become upset with the Sant. In fact, if they do find a fault in anyone, they would find it in themselves. But in no way would they perceive a flaw in the Sant. Thus, they who have realized the glory of God and the Sant has a firm foundation in satsang. Conversely, one cannot be certain about a person who has not realized such glory. All right, thank you for listening, and thank you for being patient with my commentary. I hope my commentary is not seen as something which is in contradiction with Sriji Maharaj's teachings. I just know that to my audience, which is, well, an English speaker, if you're listening to me, then that likely comes with it a culture that might not understand some of the context clues that are evident in the Vachanamrut, being from a different time, a different place, and with that, society, civilization, culture has evolved. I just hope to be mindful of everyone's perspectives, and in any way in which I can add something which would settle a concern. I feel that's my duty, my dharma. So thank you for listening. Jaya Swaminarayan.